Feng Xin was the closest to the two, and he looked at Xie Lian with an unconcealed shock. Mu Cheng, on the other hand, had glowing eyes. The schooled shock had a hidden layer of excitement. Shi Qingshuan let go of Ming Yi and said, "Chencho, did you misunderstand something? If His Highness was that Guoshi Feng Xin, how would you not recognize him until now?" Another voice rang out from the sidelines. "Qingshuan, don't you know? Legends say that the Guoshi Feng Xin was proud, mysterious, and cold. He'd always worn a white gold mask, having never shown his real face to anyone. His Highness Tai Hua must have never seen his real face." The one who spoke had his arms crossed and stood far on the sidelines. It was Pei Ming. Just seeing his face made Shi Qingshuan annoyed, and he swung his whisk. "If that's the case, then no one has seen what the Guoshi Feng Xin looks like. Why must General Pei make it sound like it's a sure thing that His Highness Shanle is the Guoshi Feng Xin?" When in action, Shi Qingshuan and Xie Lian were ridiculous and hilarious, but once in the heavenly court, they changed their composure, calm and poised, mindful of their behavior. Just then, a snow-white silhouette appeared from the back chamber. The moment he arrived, everyone calmed down. The chattering officials all stood in their place, silencing their gossip, and bowed. "Your Majesty." Jun Wu raised his hand slightly, and everyone straightened up once more. He walked willfully, and as he passed by Xie Lian, he tapped on his right shoulder. The sleeve that was still dripping with fresh blood ceased immediately after the tap. After taking a moment to look over Ming Yi, Jun Wu stated, "It's nothing serious. Settle the Earthmaster in." Thus, 4 famous medicinal heavenly officials came over to lift Ming Yi up and took him away. Shi Qingshuan looked as if he wanted to follow, but seeing the current tension in the great martial hall, he was worried and decided not to go after all. With his hands behind his back, Jun Wu returned to the throne before speaking again. "So tell me, what's happened now? Why won't Tai Hua let Shanle go? And why is Shanle bowing his head?" Chencho glanced at Xie Lian, seeing that he was still silent, as they were surrounded by heavenly officials. There was no need to fear his escape, so Chencho released his hand and turned to Jun Wu in a bow. "My lord, many hundreds of years ago, this man altered his name to Feng Xin, slaughtered my clan, and brought ruin to my kingdom. I request a duel, and pray the Lord will be our judge." Within the great martial hall, even ones who had never heard of the name Feng Xin ran to research the name within the communication array. What was uncovered was an astonishing tale. Good thing Ling Wen was present to answer everyone's queries. The Guoshi Feng Xin was the savior and teacher to the Crown Prince of Yong'an, Chencho. He was named one of the 2 wicked masters because of the infamous bloodbath that washed the Gilded Banquet of the Yong'an monarchy. "What was the Gilded Banquet?" Shi Qingshuan asked. "Lord Windmaster," Ling Wen replied, "this Gilded Banquet was a tradition passed down from the nobility of Shanle, and called thus because all the cutlery, utensils, cups, and instruments were of the highest grade of gold, exquisite and luxurious. After the kingdom of Yong'an was established, at the beginning, they announced to the world that they would not follow the culture of excess from the old kingdom, and that they would put all their focus on the people. Yet, after a few decades, the old ways were relearned, including that culture of excess." Ling Wen continued, "On the night of the 17th birthday of the Crown Prince of Yong'an, the palace threw a gilded banquet in celebration. The Guoshi Feng Xin, during that feast with one sword in his hand, slaughtered every member of the royal family in attendance. The golden goblets toppled and blood spilled like wine. Only the Crown Prince of Yong'an escaped because of his late arrival to the feast. otherwise he too would have been annihilated. This coup d'etat was a huge blow to the foundation of Yong'an, and if it wasn't for Chencho, who had the people's heart and his hard work, there would no doubt be a riot. It was with great difficulty that the chaos was settled, and soon after, the Yong'an monarchy released a bounty to pursue the fugitive murderer. At last, when he was captured, Chencho killed the evil Guoshi Fangxin with his own 2 hands. He sealed the corpse within a triple-layered coffin before sealing it again underground. However, the roots of the monarchy had been gravely damaged. Since then, it inevitably declined, before it was overtaken by another clan in the end. Chencho glared at Xie Lian. I never understood why you did what you did. You said you couldn't stand seeing us on the throne, but I didn't believe it, and I never thought that you wanted to overthrow the monarchy to take our place. But now, I finally know why. The heavenly officials had their eyes wide with shock, muttering to each other, "This is revenge." It couldn't have been anything else. The kingdom of Shanle had fallen, so he had to ruin Yong'an too. Yong'an killed his royal parents, so he had to murder the royal parents of the crown prince of Yong'an. An eye for an eye, it's pure vengeance. But the ones who wiped out Shanle weren't of Chencho's generation. This rage is unreasonable, and here I thought that the laughingstock of the 3 realms was a fool, but he's actually quite the aggressive character, going undercover as a Guoshi in an enemy state, slaughtering the entire monarchy in one go. Incredible. Xie Lian could feel Jun Wu's eyes on him and closed his own. He heard Jun Wu say, "Taihua, you firmly believe Shanle to be Fangxin, but what proof do you have?" "The Guoshi Fangxin was the one who taught me swordsmanship. How can I not recognize him the moment he strikes?" Chencho replied. The gossiping poured in like tides. Never mind making a mess of things, but isn't teaching the crown prince swordsmanship a little too much? No wonder that after the 3rd ascension, we haven't seen him touch a single sword. He's too afraid to show his tail. Chencho stated, "This time, I went to the ghost city and fought with Crimson Rain Sword Flower." The moment he mentioned the ghost city and Huachang, many of the officials shivered again in fright. But Chencho continued, "When I was 12, I was once kidnapped during an outing. The kidnappers dragged me onto the streets, and when the guards caught up, they started brawling. A street performer was dragged in, and bruised as he was, he intercepted the fight with but a tree branch, and easily rescued me with just a few swings. The kidnappers and the guards both suffered grave damages, and it was the street performer who escorted me all the way back to the palace. Out of immense gratitude, His Majesty my father and the Queen my mother fervently tried to retain him, and discovered his skills in swordsmanship, and so he was ultimately invited to become the Guoshi. He taught me the way of the blade for 5 years. I'm more than familiar with his style. How can I be wrong?" "Your Highness Taihua," Mu Qing said faintly, "you're saying that what you saw was but a shadow, and other than you, no one else has seen it. So all of this is only by your word." Mu Qing's argument sounded like it was in Xie Lian's favor, but it was actually more complex. He had already seen that Chencho wouldn't let this go, and the more he was questioned, the more he would prove himself. Not the least bit helpful to Xie Lian's situation. Sure enough, Chencho demanded, "Fine, please bring me a sword." There were many martial guards within the hall that carried a sword, and hearing his call, there was immediately a sword thrown toward him. Chencho caught it and forced it in front of Xie Lian. "Take it, we'll duel now, without holding back, using everything we've got, and see whether we have the same style, and whether I was taught by you." Everyone thought that to duel in the great martial hall was a reckless act, but with the Gilded Banquet, that a crown prince's entire family was slaughtered in cold blood, they could understand why he was this agitated. Xie Lian's injury was still on Shi Qingshuan's mind, and he said, "Chencho, His Highness blocked that attack from Huacheng and injured his right arm, so how can he duel with you?" Hearing this, Chencho suddenly extended his left palm and smacked heavily upon his own right arm. There was a loud crack, and a mist of blood spurted out from his entire right arm. From the shoulder, bleeding profusely, the limb fell limply. There wasn't any need to check to understand that it was a heavy injury, and everyone was shocked. Xie Lian was also taken aback and raised his eyes. "What are you doing?" "The Lord Windmaster was right," Chencho said. "You did injure your arm saving me, and so I return an arm to you. But saving me is one thing. Killing my clan is the undeniable truth. I know you're dexterous and can use a sword with either arm without lessening your skills. We'll duel with our left. Pick up the sword if you're a man." Xie Lian looked at the sword, then looked at him, and finally shook his head slowly. "I've sworn many years ago to never kill with the sword again." With those words, Chencho recalled that night when he finally arrived at the feast. The scene of that black-robed man pulling out a long sword from the dead bodies of his parents, his eyes reddened with madness, the sword in his left hand emitting a shaking, crackling sound from his left grip. Shi Qingshuan swung out his whisk again and wrapped it around the sword to hold it down. "I think that there might be some sort of misunderstanding. If that Guoshi Fangxin had always worn a mask, then anyone could have pretended to be him to commit murder. What does my lord think?" Everyone turned their gaze to the jaded throne. "Shanle," Jun Wu spoke. "Yes, my lord," Xie Lian bowed. "Do you concede to Tai Hua's accusations?" Jun Wu asked. "I concede," Xie Lian replied. That "I concede" was uttered in a frosty tone, very unlike Xie Lian's usual manner of speaking, and the faces of Feng Xin, Mu Qing, and Shi Qingshuan all dropped. Jun Wu nodded and asked, "The Guoshi Fangxin who spilt blood upon the Gilded Banquet, was it you?" After a moment of silence, Xie Lian raised his head, determined. "That's right, it was me." Words of steel with no turning back. "So you admit, very good," Chencho said. As mentioned previously, there were innumerous heavenly officials with mortal blood on their hands in the upper court, but truthfully, there hadn't been that many who had their blood debt escalate to this point. It might be because those mortals didn't have someone like Chencho in the family who could ascend and demand justice from the heavens. Before, Pei Su had General Pei as a shield, but in the end, he couldn't escape exile. Xie Lian had no one behind him, so now it would all depend on whether Jun Wu still valued past affections and had the heart to protect him. Yet, many still couldn't fathom what attitude Jun Wu held towards Xie Lian. After his first ascension, the Crown Prince of Shanle was of course treated with the utmost favor. After the second ascension, the two had a huge fight, and Xie Lian even stabbed Jun Wu a few times before he was defeated. And now, this third ascension, the two had been at peace with each other, as if the past conflicts had been forgiven. And Jun Wu even built a palace in the nicest area of the heavenly capital for Xie Lian. It was truly difficult to understand. Now, everyone had their ears attentive, waiting eagerly to hear how the Lord would sentence Xie Lian. However, before Jun Wu had the chance to pass a verdict, Xie Lian spoke up first. "Shanle has a presumptuous request." "What is it?" Jun Wu responded. "I humbly ask the Lord to remove my godhood and banish me to the mortal realm, Xie Lian said. Some of the heavenly officials were astonished, and at the same time amazed. Of course, no one wanted to be banished. It's not easy to ascend. To work so hard, to climb so high, only to fall, just thinking about it felt rueful. To dare ask for banishment from Jun Wu so straightforwardly, a lot of them would never be able to do it. Some of the other heavenly officials didn't think much of it. After all, at this point, it might be better to back off than to fight to the death. Xie Lian had been banished twice already. A third time probably meant nothing to him, and maybe he was even used to it. Chencho, on the other hand, objected. I don't need you to banish yourself. Ascension happens because you have the skills. I only want a duel. I don't want to fight you, Xie Lian said. Why? Chencho shouted. It's not like we've never fought before. Life or death, the outcome doesn't matter. Let's just put an end to this. No reason, Xie Lian said plainly. Fight me, and you will for sure die.